Hello, welcome to our second in the series of talks about world disorder. It's a great pleasure today to introduce an old friend and colleague, Emmanuel Todd, who was at Trinity at the same time Trinity in Cambridge at the same time I was. He was studying properly at the time, and little did I know, but his work on 18th century Europe was being accompanied by a work on the collapse of the Soviet Union, which I was studying at the time. He never quite told me about it, and then a book appeared on the collapse of the Soviet Union a few years later, in 1976, but there's always a problem predicting things much too early, because others in France then predicted it later and did rather better from it. And after this, Emmanuel went on to write other works, such as the Invention of Europe, After Empire on the United States, and the latest has caused quite a furore, which is Qui est Charlie, about the Charlie Hebdo affair. But really, within Emmanuel's work, there's a key thread that relates to his work at the Institute of Demography, which his core work on the nature of the family in Europe in the peasant world of pre-industrial Europe is a thread going right the way through all of his writings. And today this leads all the way from the family through to the problem of the United States and globalization, and the problems that derive from that in relations with Germany. Over to you.
Well, thanks very much for being here. I'll first have to apologize for the way I shall present things, because I will not, 45 minutes is not enough to prove things. I'll just be able to develop perhaps an unusual vision of history, and that'll be it. So I apologize in advance. I have three parts. First, I'll try to give some general notions on the present divergence of advanced societies, a little theory on traditional family systems, and on the modern resilience of the value systems that shaped these family systems in the past. Then I'll apply the theory to Europe, or rather to the new German Europe, or what I call German system, something that has emerged in the past 25 years. And then I suggest briefly that the US foreign policy establishment ought to take this into account, because at the stage we've reached, functioning with an old-fashioned vision of Europe as the embodiment of liberal democratic values, has already produced disastrous results for Europe, for Russia, and I think for the US. So I'll start with the divergence of advanced societies. Well, the divergence is pretty obvious for demographers, and basically I'm a demographer. I belong to the French National Institute of Demographic Studies, and it's pretty obvious for demographers that the most advanced societies are diverging. The fertility rate in Germany is 1.4, it's 1.4 in Japan, it's been so for years. It's close to 2 in the US, in France, in the UK, and Scandinavia. This implies, these diverging fertility rates imply diverging futures. The projected median ages for the populations are very different. If you take 2050, the median age will be 41 in the US and Sweden, 43 in France and the UK, 53 in Germany, and Japan, a little over in Japan. So the standard explanation for that divergence is that fertility rates are reasonably high in countries where women do not have to make a hard choice between work and children. This points to deep, persistent differences in traditional family values. Societies with a traditional high status of women turn out to adjust more easily as far as reproduction is concerned to the various recent or not so recent mental revolutions, well, the mental revolutions of the last 50 years, consumer society, mass higher education, emancipation of women, and so on. So I will now talk, well, this is accepted theory. This is standard theory for demographers. There's nothing original at all in what I just said. I will now turn to something, to a less accepted theory, well, my personal theory, the connection between the traditional family system in the world and the modern ideologies and the way these family systems have shaped in the 20th century and what followed. The American, French or Russian Revolution, Nazism, and many other things. I started, but this perhaps was the major discovery in my whole life, the day I realized the map of communism at its highest point, say the middle of the 70s, was very much the same as the map of a specific family system. What I call the community family. It's easier to call it that way. It used to be called the patriarchal family, or it's sometimes called the joint family. What you must imagine briefly is a father, his sons, all cohabiting within a large household, and with very strong values of authority between generations, and a strong value of equality between brothers. So this applies to, this was the traditional family in Russia, China, Vietnam, most of Yugoslavia, and in places where you find, or where until very recently you could find pockets of communist vote in Western Europe, central Italy, part of Finland, part of central France. In all those places you could find the community family. And the explanation is fairly simple. When with modernization, the community family broke down and somehow liberated its traditional values. And the traditional values in that family system were, as I said, a strong pattern of authority and an equally strong pattern of equality. That was the basis for the emergence of communism in Russia, China, Vietnam, or, as I said, well, small pockets of communism in Western Europe. So, if you take other regions, you will find, or you would have found other types of family system in the past. In the Anglo-American world, you would have found perhaps the very opposite of that system, the pure nuclear family. This was discovered, revealed by Peter Laslett, who was my supervisor at Cambridge. Well, what he discovered among English peasants in the 17th century was what we today consider as the modern family. A conjugal pair plus children and nothing else, with children expelled from the family as soon as is possible, 13, or as servants, or any system that makes it possible to get them out of the household. And of course, if these children want to get married, they have to found a new household. So you only find at any stage in a life cycle, in the development of families, you will find very simple households of parents and children. And to this must be added a lack of very precise inheritance rules, no fixed pattern of equality, And this was the basis for the development of individualism, liberal systems, political or economic. Well, here I'm only repeating what was discovered or hypothesized by Alan Macfarlane in Cambridge. Alan Macfarlane, I'm talking about people I knew, about people I worked with a very long time ago in Cambridge. Alan Macfarlane was my internal examiner at Cambridge when I submitted my PhD thesis. So he was the first one to suggest that the possible connection between the very ancient nuclear pattern in the family and the easy development of liberalism in England and later, of course, in America, because basically the American family system is very much like the English system. And so my vision of thing, my theory of what I'm saying just now is in a way a very French generalization of what Macfarlane discovered or said about the connection between the English family and English individualism. So what about France? In France, we've got a central system which looks very much like the English one. It's a nuclear family with that difference that children, not simply brothers, but all children, brothers and sisters are defined as completely equal by the inheritance system. So you got in France, you've got what the family system in France defined is freedom of individuals, independence of children, equality of brothers, and from these basic family principle you can deduce what happened in French history. And what happened was the French Revolution and the general ideas of liberty and equality. Fraternité was added later for some reason unknown to me. This is a standard, perhaps the standard vision of France, but these days it is perhaps especially important not to remain with too simple a vision of France. There's really France is really two countries fused into one. So what I was telling you about, liberty, equality within the family, in the political ideology, was very much about central France, the Paris basin, the central part, the part that really made the revolution around Paris. But there is second France, the periphery, and on the periphery of France, you'll have very different types of family systems. Family systems not built on the principle of equality among children, family systems with strong patterns of authority between parents and children, family systems that encouraged a preference for hierarchy and in regions that resisted the French Revolution. That peripheral France is much more German, in fact, than it is typically French. So I come to Germany and Japan, and I'll describe briefly their family systems, which are very much, very similar in both cases. You have what's called traditionally the Sten family. What you must imagine is you start with a couple, and one child is chosen among the children to become the legitimate heir. Usually it's first male child inheritance, and the basic values in the same family are not individualistic. They're neither individualistic nor egalitarian. You've got a strong pattern of authority, integration of the individual within a large family at some stages in the developmental cycle, and this is very different with France or Central France. You've got inequality between brothers. And this is, when that type of family disintegrates, it releases values of hierarchy, a value of strong integration of individuals into groups, whether these groups are very general, like states, or bureaucracies, trade union, churches. Well, the Sten family defines a holistic culture as opposed to an individualistic culture. Well, it's no use spending too much time on the past. What I wanted to suggest briefly is, or evoke, is the way I see the world, the way I describe differences, cultural differences throughout the world. Different types of family, different family systems of family values, and something is, well, surprising is happening. I'm an empiricist at heart. I have no preconception of things. And when I first discovered the connection between these traditional family systems and the way the world modernized, the way the community family seemed to produce communism while disintegrating, the way the absolute nuclear family of the Anglo-American world produced, well, easy liberal, well, natural liberal system, constitutional monarchy or the American Revolution, the way the Sten family produced much more ethnocentric and authoritarian systems in Germany or Japan. I had no idea that the differences would persist, the differences between countries would persist indefinitely. I had the notion that this was simply a transition phenomenon, and that after the transition, after the family had become nuclear everywhere, societies would converge. There's, well, too recently I read an excellent book by William Good, an American sociologist or demographer, I don't know how to tell, who had observed as early as 1963 in his book World Revolution and Family Patterns that households were everywhere becoming nuclear, that the conjugal family everywhere had started to predominate. But what I have, and this is what I had in mind as I was writing, and this, I mean, to me, the convergence of household patterns would have implied in a distant or not so distant future a convergence of values and a convergence of advanced societies. But, and this is a completely empirical observation, regional or national values these days do not converge. This first appeared in a study, well, I've got many examples and many stages, but this first became completely apparent to me in a book I wrote with my colleague Hervé Lebras about the most recent developments in France. You see, France is, well, I don't think France is no longer a very important country in a way, I'm sorry to say. But it is very useful it can be very useful to social anthropologists because it's very diverse. We've got several systems within one. I was talking about Central France, individualistic, egalitarian, and peripheral France, more hierarchical, more German in a way. And in our recent book called Le Mystère Français, the French mystery, the book we wrote with Hervé Lebras, we had to admit that regional differences persisted in France, and it's not simply that regional differences went on persisting. It's that there's something new that started to appear, and the new thing was that the periphery adjusted was in a better process of adjustment to globalization. You see, the individualistic core of the system has a great deal of trouble in France, and the periphery, these holistic systems with traditions of more discipline, more integration of the individual, fares better, whether this better is measured in terms of education, employment. And what's happening in France is now it's that the periphery is much more prosperous than the center. And that part of France which is more prosperous is, in effect, the part of France that admires and wants to emulate Germany. And I think this is a very general, what we discovered about France is a very general thing. Integration at this stage of globalization, where the markets and the individuals are supposed to be supreme, regional or national culture, which gives some kind of protection to individuals, which protection is combined to a measure of discipline and cooperation. Well, this gives a sort of a competitive advantage to these regional and national society. This is a general paradox. The globalization of Anglo-American individualistic values as in the end, or seems to be giving a competitive advantage to non-individualistic societies. Social cohesion in holistic societies can produce and does produce a kind of singleness of purpose entirely lacking in truly liberal societies. It's as if a kind of free public good existed, something inherited from the past, and this produces efficiency. I now apply this to several examples much more important than France, much bigger than France, and that lead to, or that might lead to problems in the future. When I leave the case of Japan, I think everybody will accept the idea that Japan is at the same time Japanese and modern, and that in Japan there is a kind of resilience of traditional family values and tradition of social cohesion and so on. I'll start with Russia, with the Russian case. Putin's Russia is no longer communist, obviously, but she's retained some community values from her past. And since Russia has gotten over the worst of the post-communist transition crisis, it has shown surprising resilience. From what we've just seen in Ukraine and Syria, she no longer fears the US. The government gets massive supports from the population. No decrease in the price of oil and the revenues of oil exports seems to have any effect on this. But we must remember that, well, of course, Russia is supposed to be the arch enemy, but in truth, Russia is not such a big country. It's a medium-sized country. The territory is vast, but the population is only 144 million, very close to Japan's 127. The US population now reaches 320 million. The European community reaches 508 million. And in the case of Russia, weapon exports cannot hide the general technological backwardness of the country. But still, Russia no longer fears the US. And this we see every day. So again, I repeat, social cohesion, that's in Russia what's left of the community family, has given Russia some kind of competitive advantage. Competitive advantage is here conceived in terms of survival or state within the, or strength within the general geopolitical system. I'll now turn to the less obvious case of German power. Of course, we're all supposed to believe in the existence of one and only one Western world. I'll try to show now, and this is the main, perhaps the title or main dimension of the talk, why the I'll try to show why the Anglo-American world and German-dominated Europe are diverging. Germany is even smaller than Russia. It's a country of only 81 million people. Her population is one of the most rapidly aging in the world. But her achievement since reunification has been overwhelming, truly impressive. I list reconstruction of the eastern part of the country, reorganization and integration into the German economic system of the ex-Soviet people's democracies, internal wage control leading to supremacy within the Eurozone. I'll give some last figures from The Economist. 280 billion trade surplus, 8% of GDP. More generally, Germany has completely reorganized the European Union and turned it into a fully German system. So we must forget, this is the difficult part, and from my point of view, the important part of the exercise. We must try to forget the usual representation of the European Union as weak because it is heterogeneous. We must stop thinking about the European Union as a mess of babbling liberal democracies without an army, without a will. We must try to look at it with what I call, although I'm French, with the German eyes and the German values, traditional values of authority and inequality, with what's left, in fact, of the Sten family. I was talking at the beginning of this lecture. From this point of view, Europe is a well-ordered and perfectly functioning hierarchical system. At the center, there is not only Germany, but a larger German core, either German-speaking nations or nations whose economy is intimately connected with the German industrial system, or even minor nations for which the German-speaking world is historically the boss. So what is the German core? I list Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Belgium, the Czech Republic, Croatia, and Slovenia. With all these added, we reach 144 million people, already the size of Russia, with more technology. To this German core, we can safely add a close ring of Lutheran Baltic states, all slowly drifting back to their pre-World War I cultural alignment with German values. The case of Sweden is especially fascinating. So that's Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Estonia, Latvia. That's another 24 million people with a very high educational level. And with these added, we now have a global German system of 168 millions. Now you add, well, I'm French, I'm going to say something horrible. I'm touring the world these days saying horrible things about France. So if anybody thinks I'm Germanophobic, well, add Francophobia first. So to these 160 million people, I said the German core, we must add what I call the French satellite, because it should by now be obvious to everybody that France will stick to Germany whatever she decides. For the French elite, America is no longer the leader. Germany is. Hans Kuhnani, in his excellent book, The Paradox of German Power, even shows that it was Schröder, not Chirac, who decided to resist the US during the irresistible march to the Iraq War. Whatever the grandeur and beauty of Dominique de Villepin's speech at the United Nations, Germany decided on resisting the US, not France. But France is always sticks to Germany. So with the French in the new state of what I call in French and translate directly into English as voluntary servitude, is it understandable? Is it correct? The German system now reaches 232 million people. Now, this is the top of the hierarchy within the new Europe, you see. Partners, or sub-partners in the case of France. We must now examine the functions of the fully dominated elements in the new Europe. First, we've got the southern part of the Eurozone, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Greece. These have two functions. Well, of course, the euro has turned these countries, together with France, for that matter, into captive markets. They're weak from a technological point of view. They lack social discipline. They've lost their currency independence, so they can't devaluate. And, well, these have been turned into sort of a fair game for German industry, you see. And they're sort of captive markets. This is well known. Everybody knows this. Even The Economist, the English paper. I think, was it founded in 1844, The Economist, something like this? And so in my head, I keep the sentence, wrong since 1844. Sorry. But it's about the southern Eurozone. It's not simply that they're a captive market, but that it's something new is appearing. It's that as they stagnate and destroy their younger generation, they now have a second function. They provide qualified and even elite labor for the German core system. From an American point of view, with the general notion of a right to happiness in mind, the austerity policies of Europe are pure madness, see? And every month, every week, we'll have Paul Krugman and others fulminating in the press about that madness. But remember, Germany's weakness is her demography. The quest for manpower is her permanent strategic objective. And the destruction of southern economies, or perhaps even of the southern society of Europe, provides excellent manpower for the north. So at this stage, I think you'll probably think I'm German-phobic paranoid. You see, but I'm an old-fashioned empiricist, and I accept to see the power of German culture, and this makes it possible for me not to live in endless denial. What I am talking about is perfectly conscious German policy. I here have a Xerox copy of a Spiegel cover story dating from February 2013, That's one of the two major quality weeklies in Germany, I would say. And on it you will see the happy and serious faces of 17 young people from Southern Europe with the title Die neuen Gastarbeiter, or the new immigrant workers, and the illuminating subtitle, which I translate directly into English, Europe's Young Elites for the German Economy. This is perfectly conscious. So adding the Southern Eurozone brings the total German system to 363 million people. We are now very close to the US plus Canada total of 357 millions. But German Europe is still left with a trump card, a mini internal China of 84 million people in Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, with a well-communist educated labor force, with median wages between 280 and 650 euros, when the average for the Eurozone is close to 2,000 euros. China is around 450. Sweden in the north, that's out of the Eurozone, is at 2,500 euros. Romania in the south, also out of the Eurozone, is at 300. Ratio is 1 to 8. So with these added, with the internal little China added, the new German Europe now reaches 446 million people. I think I'll stop here. I have left out only the UK, Ireland, and Norway. Let's consider these countries as independent or trying to remain independent. And please, for a moment, forget American preconception of an individualistic free market composed of equivalent atoms, individuals, reaching in a most Smithian way optimal adjustment. Again, please realize that this system, far from being a mess, I mean, Europe could be described as a mess, but the way I describe it could be a system, a perfectly well-ordered system, and the very embodiment of traditional German values. What you have is an orderly hierarchical vision. Unequal workers are nicely integrated into national or regional subsystems. Remember the Sten Family with its core values of authority and inequality. Integration of the individual at the center of things. So at the top, you've got Germany with a very original government union of left and right to ensure singleness of purpose. And what you have here is an industrial labor force at least twice the size of the North American labor force, well educated, protected from accelerated free trade destruction by German and post-communist value system. So let's get back to the great debate on the rise of inequality in advanced societies and elsewhere. I think there's now, I'm an old-fashioned French egalitarian person, you see. I'm a loser in history, but I'm trying to get into the mood that inequality is the thing now. I think I tend to think there is now general subconscious belief in the West that, although sad, inequality is good for efficiency. And so Anglo-Americans, perhaps pity the backwardness of Europeans, kept away from the full modernity of inequality by their old-fashioned social states and their welfare benefits. And I would say there that if you think in this way, you've got it completely wrong. The new Europe has in fact beaten America in the great drive for inequality, and by a wide margin. Remember, median wage in Sweden, 2,500 euros, in Romania, 300. I'm ready to bet that what's left of the American industrial system will not resist the new transatlantic partnership, whatever the achievement, prestige, and profits of Silicon Valley and the internet giants. And Germany is all for the transatlantic partnership. So I'll end with I'll have the time, yes? With some implications for US strategy. And just with a rapid list or set of proposition. Well, perhaps this is simply wishful thinking, but it's, I think the US should stop seeing Europe as a divided, heterogeneous, purposeless mass. Of course, Europe will disintegrate in the end, but there's no question about it. That's our destiny. But much later than expected, and only after much harm has been done. Someone will probably think at this stage, as usual, you see. So, Europe is an integrated system under leading Germany and under predominantly German values. And see how it is difficult for the UK to get out, in spite of its belonging to the wider English-speaking world. In a new German Europe, France, I'm sorry to say, has privileged status. As long as she remains in her state of voluntary servitude, the German system is safe. And this is the reason why the Germans always seem to accommodate the French. This is the reason, the deep reason why France has been able to reject many, or perhaps most, of the necessary adjustments to globalization. Why France has been able to turn into a kind of sleeping beauty. I cannot go into details, but I rather admire the way the German elites have kept the French middle classes happy. There's great subtlety in the game. 3, Germany no longer cares what the US is saying. Economic policy is a case in point. American suggestion that world global demand should be taken into account have been ignored for years by Germany and as a consequence by Europe and rather superbly. 4, there is a German will, a drive for power of a new and paradoxical nature. It is expansion without an army, and most paradoxical of all, it is a drive for power in spite of an aging population. This is incredible when you think of it. Japan, with a similar demographic problem, has renounced power. I know Japan pretty well. The Japanese refuse mass immigration. They consider cultural homogeneity as much more important than economic or global power. 5, economic power with a declining demographic base explains, in my view, most of German policy. This can be summarized as an endless quest for labor. I've already suggested that austerity's hidden purpose is to squeeze out of Italy or Spain highly qualified labor. The recent drive eastward into Ukraine, I think, could be explained in the same way. Personally, I'm convinced that Germany, not the US, was the leader in the push for Ukraine. Its 43 million inhabitants would have been a major bonus in the quest for labor. Of course, once the Russians had reacted and retaken Crimea, the US had to get in vociferously so as not to lose face. But really, NATO has turned into the military tool of Germany's economic expansion. Or economic expansion is not the proper term because there's an element of limited rationality here because of the demographic decline. Or NATO has turned into a tool or into the military tool of Germany's drive for demographic survival. And again, I hope I'm not in a paranoid mood, because, well, in practice, the drive into Ukraine is completely misfired, as most refugees from Ukraine have in fact fled to Russia and are about to solve Russia's demographic problem for the next decade. The Russian problem is less severe than Germany's. The fertility rate has already gone up to 1.8 in Russia, and I guess they will not be a major demographic problem with Russia in the future. So the last episode in the new German history of Europe, but you must realize that being French or being a European now is, well, of course we've got news from the primaries in Iowa or New Hampshire, and it's important for us to know who will be the next American president. But most of the news, most of the action in Europe now comes from Germany, you see. Even in France, we pretend to have a national history, and we also try to elect presidents. But basically, we have to deal with a German conception of austerity. And the last episode, the Europeans were slowly adjusting to the idea of a bad Germany not reacting to the sufferings of Greece and so on. And then we had the refugee crisis, and suddenly we had to adjust to the news of a good Germany acting in defense or for the protection of refugees. Well, again, I think that the same concept of a quest for labor explains Germany's attitude at the beginning of the refugee crisis. But by this time, things have gone beyond, in my view, I'm almost finished, in my view, beyond any kind of rationality, be it a limited kind of rationality. Over the years, Germany has turned into a major immigration country. And contrary to what many people think in France and elsewhere, Germany assimilates new populations from the east or the south of Europe very successfully. But cultural difference makes a difference. And to be brief, let me point out that the story of Turkish immigrants in Germany has not been as successful. There are cultural differences, family systems are different. In Muslim countries, you've got what social anthropologists will call cousin marriage, a tendency of the family to close in on itself. And in the case of the Turks in Germany, the rate of first cousin marriage was 15% among Turkish immigrants. But among immigrants from Syria, the rate of first cousin marriage is 35%. It's a much higher level and an entirely different system. Well, the rate of cousin marriage is, in all European native population is below 1%. It's almost non-existent. So at this stage, and this is what we already feel in the change of attitude, in the conflict, in the Pegida anti-Islam or Islamophobic meetings, well, Germany is headed for disaster. So we are now back, very briefly, I'm sorry, to a second important dimension of German culture. So the first one was tremendous efficiency, something we must respect and something we must take into account. But the second is what I've already called limited rationality, soon leading to irrationality and loss of nerve. So, my conclusion rapidly, Germany is about to turn into a problem. Well, first, Germany is a small country, started with 81 million inhabitants. And from that small country, I've been able to describe the expansion of a new kind of continental system. And this system is about to become a problem for the world. European austerity policies are already largely responsible for the looming new world recession. And I wish really that the US would get out of a general attitude of denial. Underestimating German power and irrationality can no longer hide the fact that the US has lost control in Europe. Now I come to American hostility towards Russia. Something I find more and more difficult to understand. I wouldn't say accept, I am nothing, so whether I accept it or not is meaningless. But it's getting dysfunctional. Russia is a stable but middle ranking power. And I said US hostility to Russia will no longer suffice to hide the fact that the US no longer controls Western Europe. Germany does. You see? It's all a matter of not losing face. But hostility to Russia will not do it. And generally, when I think of it, it's American policy towards the Russia since the collapse of communism has been a complete mistake. It's made it possible for the drive of NATO eastward. It simply made it possible for Germany to build a fully integrated European system with non-liberal values and a strategic rival for the US. By comparison to German Europe, Russia is small, stable, and rational. I fully admit that Russia is not a liberal democracy, but as Putin endlessly repeats, attacking the West would be madness for Russia. What Russia needs is not more territory. She's already got too much for a Japanese-sized population. You see? In terms of population, Russia is a small country. What Russia needs is safety and respect. And so, as Russia gets more powerful and unstable, with internal tensions increasing, with Islamophobia everywhere on the rise, with Germanophobia also on the rise in Italy, Poland, and elsewhere, well, I very much hope the American attitude will change. And now I'll define myself in the end. Yes, this is the last sentence, see? And as a basically pro-American left-wing Frenchman, that's what I am, in spite of anything I could say, I very much hope the US gets ready discreetly, without fuss, to cooperate with Russia when the time comes. Thank you.